Dude, why is Druid always so scary? We got a bunch of Druid cards, a couple different terrifying packages in this video to talk about for Druid. You can see the spell damage stuff starting right here behind me. I'm actually feeling a little bit better finally. I might still sound a bit hoarse, I'm sure, but actually on the upswing. Not feeling as bad today. So that said, let's kick things off here with Aulonius. This fella's a 7 mana, 6/6. Spell damage +1, and it reads, your spells get double bonus from spell damage. So while Aulonius is on the board, you've got some potentially scary stuff happening with spell damage. And of course, that often means lethality potential, because if your spells are scaling a bunch off spell damage and you have multiple instances of spell damage, then things can get pretty scary pretty quickly. I just want to remind you of the first card we saw introduced for Druid. I actually teased how scary the mini spell damage version of this could be. That 1/1 that gives you +1 spell damage. It's just such a cheap way to get spell damage. If you start weaving that together in a turn with something like Aulonius, man, the spell damage starts going crazy. And if you thought that was all you had to worry about, no, we've also got this, a location with 3 durability that only costs 1 mana. So you can load up a couple of these early, wait for your Aulonius turn, hit this button twice, basically, if you got 2 of them, right? That's already spell damage +2. Aulonius is spell damage +3. Weave in a couple small Chia Drakes, you're at spell damage +5. And of course, your cards are getting double bonus from that spell damage. So if you have any mana left for, you know, cheap spells, Moonfire-esque stuff, then you're just going to be able to blow up the opponent. Now, notably, Druid doesn't have Moonfire, right? They also, I think, lost some stuff like Solar Eclipse as well in the core set. So some of the, like, shenanigan-y things are gone, but we're going to see spells in this video like Sparkling File here, which clearly deals damage to face if you want, and has some cost reductions as well that can make things, like, absurdly cheap. So between that, maybe some ways to cheat out Aulonius, Druid's ability to gain a bunch of mana, of course, and you're talking about, you know, the potential, like, crazy OTK possibilities that might exist here. I don't know how exactly all of those pieces are going to line up, because 7 is pretty expensive for Aulonius at a base, but I do know that Druid finds ways to do this. They just find ways to get way too much mana. They find ways to just make things happen that shouldn't otherwise happen. They have innervates, they have all this stuff and so on, and before you know it, you're going to take like 30 to the face from an Aulonius spell damage combo at one point or another. Will it be a top meta deck? Maybe not always. Probably something you have to keep in the back of your mind for a long time, but still pretty darn terrifying. Do keep in mind cards like Swipe are also coming back to standard, so even if it's not a lethal hit off of something like Aulonius, just a swipe with Aulonius and a spell damage hit here or there is going to do a billion face damage and like wipe out entire boards and stuff. So there are other ways to use this. Now one other thing I wanted to talk about here is the phrasing, your spells get double bonus from spell damage. That is text we've seen before on Arcane Blast. So we do know that this will double up the damage, because Arcane Blast, of course, would scale up to like 4 with 1 spell damage or whatever, right? So we know it works with damage, but there are going to be some cards we'll talk about here in a minute that also do an extra thing with spell damage. So I'm wondering if that wording of bonus is generic enough here, that a card like this that allows you to discover a card from your deck, and then if you have spell damage, copy it. Would it copy it twice with Aulonius? And then there's this one too. The Woodland Wonders cost 3 less if you have spell damage. Would this make it cost 6 less? I don't know. I don't think so. The wording is generic, but I think it's probably just because bonus kind of makes it sound like, oh, it's not just about damage. It's about like other things that are happening. I don't think so though. I don't know. These seem more like conditional. They're more like if statements than like scaling values. It's kind of, you have to kind of force that in to work. So I doubt it, but definitely something to keep in mind, I guess. Something that might be an extra bonus. But anyway, these aren't really for Aulonius turns, so I don't think that's extra relevant in particular. So anyway, to wrap that up, all in all, I mean, this just looks scary, right? Like, it's just got potential to do nasty things. In some ways, I think the rest of this package is actually super, super good, and Aulonius might be overkill or unnecessary in some ways. We'll talk about that as we get into these cards, but still the potential for this one, in Druid especially, you know, it's just, it's got that that scary potential outcome where you're just dead all the time. So moving on to Magical Dollhouse, I think this card is just completely nuts to me. It's a 1-mana card. You gain spell damage this turn only. You get 3 chances to do that. So this is a super cheap way to get some nice spell damage on demand while still preserving the ability for some of that lethality later. And that's actually been one of the bigger challenges for spell damage cards in many cases, is like if you're using them, it's often because you want to like kill somebody with them, right? And you want to set up some kind of OTK or just find that necessary damage. And it was sometimes hard to use them in a pinch if you needed to for like a board clear or even just like single target removal. It could feel punishing in some ways to waste your spell damage cards early. But with Magical Dollhouse, you get the best of both worlds. You play this, you got to swipe on turn 3 to clear up the opponent's board. Slam your Magical Dollhouse, hit the button. You're going to get more spell damage back later, so you can still use it to empower that swipe. Remember, swipe costs 3 nowadays. In case you're like, wait, what? Swipe on turn 3? Use it to clear up a board, right? It's no big deal. Like, fine, yeah, you still get a little chip damage to face along the way, too. It's a nice little bonus, right? So you don't have to feel guilty about using it. So as long as you have spells and abilities, in particular, like, you know, Bottomless Toy Chest and Woodland Wonders here, like we looked at already, that benefit, yeah, no problem. I can still save that lethality for later and benefit along the way, which to me just looks like a really good option. I think a lot of decks would find the excuse to run this. Basically, if you're running anything that benefits from spell damage to a rate enough that this is worth it, just makes sense, right? Like, how many cards do you need? 4, 5, 6 to make it worth it? Maybe. And then that means Magical Dollhouse is a pretty cool option. So let's talk about the Bottomless Toy Chest here. Arcane Spell, 2 mana. Discover a card from your deck. If you have spell damage, copy it. And yeah, we know that discovering things from your deck is good. We know that getting extra copies of things from your deck is good. Imagine a card like Sparkling File here, which we'll talk about, of course, but like getting 2 of these, that's insane because they're going to make each other free, and then you're going to blow people up with Alonius with all of this bonus spell damage on this deal 2 damage, and that can be nuts. Just getting copies of, you know, awesome Titan cards or whatever big crazy thing you want is possible with this Bottomless Toy Chest. And I mean, you currently have, you know, this is spell damage, you have your Chia as spell damage. Maybe you don't have a million spell damage options, but even if this doesn't hit a spell damage, you just feel like you want to spend your mana efficiently, spend 2. Discovering a card from your deck is still going to feel fine at a baseline, and then you're going to have those moments where you can save it, greed it a little bit, or just get extra value because things lined up on curve and you're super happy. But basically, I really like this card and the Woodland Wonders because they give your spell damage proactivity, which usually spell damage only has reactivity. You're using spell damage to react to something that your opponent does or to close a game. So often spell damage feels dead in hand, or in the case of the location, dead on board, because you don't really have any ways to use it if your opponent's not doing anything. If they're like a pre-stack, they're not playing minions or whatever for you to react to, no way to use your spell damage. So these cards both give you a little bit of that proactivity so that you can still feel like you're benefiting from your location, still benefiting from those spell damage commitments in your deck, still getting things out of them while still setting up for later as well, which I think is actually very nice. Speaking of that, let's talk Woodland Wonders here. 5 mana spell. Summon 2 1/5 Beetles with Taunt, and it costs 3 less if you have spell damage. So as a 5 mana spell, you're definitely not that excited to play 2 1/5 Beetles with Taunt. I mean, I'm sure there will be moments that it's worth it because it's just like, oh god, I got nothing else to do. I just need to create a little bit of a wall here for the aggro deck to bash into so I don't die too quickly. But if you want to spend 2 mana on this, you know, it gives you a pretty cool on-curve play to follow up on the location. You have the location, you hit the button, you get to play Woodland Wonders for 2 1/5s on turn 2 is certainly much better. In fact, it's so good, I wonder sometimes if there's even like a token deck that could use this, like a spell damage token hybrid that's trying to cheese out like 1/5s early to build on with board buffs and stuff. That might be a little bit too incongruous for a deck to come together around all that because you need minions instead of spell damage most of the time, but it's at least an interesting little angle that a card like this could take. Alternatively, this is probably just, again, a proactive way to get defensive, stay alive while pushing that spell damage game plan late, where you're just trying to hang in there till you can blow up the opponent, which this seems like a cool fit. So now let's talk about this damage card, Sparkling File. This is 3 mana arcane spell, deal 2 damage. Your next card this turn costs that much less. So clearly, as the damage scales up here, the discount also scales up as well, which I think makes this super scary, right? Even if it's just, you know, get this to 3 and chain together a few Sparkling Vials, that's a possibility, right? That's potentially a lot of damage, because maybe 3 is not the number, but 3 or more, if you get these up to 6, 7, whatever with your combo, you're going to be able to play 2+ of these at no additional cost, basically, as soon as you hit that 3 damage breakpoint, which means a lot of damage for only this 3 mana upfront cost. Particularly if you have this into swipe, for instance, all of those cost 3. As long as this first one's at 3, that's only a 3 mana total commitment for 9 mana worth of cards, and that's of course a ton of potential damage as well. So Aulonius plus Magical Dollhouse, you're already looking at +2 spell damage, which is really like +4 with Aulonius. That makes file 6, discounts your next card by 6, which if it's another file, that's fine. You've dealt 12 damage now. You play a swipe. I guess that's dealing 10 damage as well, right, for 0 mana. And suddenly, that's 22 damage right there in just 3 cards. And you probably have more than that you can weave in as well. And who knows what else is happening, more spell damage on board, etc. So to me, this just looks scary, right? Cost discounts are very good. Damage is very good. Scaling like this is good. And even if you don't cheat out damage with this, could you maybe somehow set up a world where you actually use this to cheat out your Aulonius or something? Probably doesn't make sense, but it's definitely a possibility to cheat out something else big and scary that's not necessarily damage. That's pretty wild, because you could just play this early, right? Play the location down, discount something by who knows how much, get a big card into play early and use that to try to win the game. So yeah, this looks very strong to me. So next up here, we're going to move to the other side of Druid and take a look at a new legendary, Sky Mother Aviana. I think this is supposed to look like one of those twirling flying toys. I don't know what those are called. There's that funny video of a girl pulling the string on one, it flies up and it flies straight into the fireplace and catches on fire. It does make this art look a little awkward to me, but it's okay. We know what it is. So it's a 6 mana 5/5 Battlecry, shuffle 10 random legendary minions into your deck, and they cost 1. So clearly that could have some crazy hits. Hit a big awesome Titan for 1 mana. That's going to be a great draw sometimes. But I'll remind you just how many bad legendaries there are as well, where sometimes you're going to get a 1 mana legendary that, I guess the stats will often feel fine, even if it's a small legendary. Usually you're not going to be overpaying for stats, just like random 5/5s and stuff. For 1 are going to be okay, but the effects won't necessarily be good. And certainly your draws won't feel particularly synergistic either. You're going to be getting a bunch of random effects and things that don't really go together. It's going to be hard to necessarily find a game plan. You're going to have to overwhelm your opponent with kind of efficiency, but not synergy, which in Hearthstone historically has not really been a recipe for success. Often you want synergy, you want game plans. We do, of course, have random decks doing random things that find ways to win. I don't want to say we don't. That's, Mage right now, I think, is doing that. We've had plenty of rogue kind of thief stuff lately doing that as well. So it's definitely possible, but there's a couple problems with this card in particular. You got to spend the 6 up front, which probably doesn't feel great. You got to draw into these cards, which means you need to commit additional mana to start finding these. And even though there's 10, you still, it might take a couple draws to really find one. It might take even more draws to find a good one, because there's a lot of bad random legendaries in the pool. You're going to get just random, 3 cost legendary that doesn't do much. Okay, I got a 1 mana 3/3, it's fine, but it's not really what I needed to swing this game or stay alive or really flip this in my favor. So unless you're drawing a bunch all at once, which there are some ways to do that. We got the Gaslight Gatekeeper or whatever to draw a bunch of cards all at once. It could help, definitely. But still, now you're 9 mana committed for this game plan without really doing much. So I just worry in some ways about the swinginess of this, the deck construction of this, and the randomness of this all being downsides. That said, is that kind of 1-2 punch of Sky Mother Aviana into Gaslight Gatekeeper, is that going to give you, a couple 1-cost Titans in hand? Is that enough to swing the game? How do you build the rest of the deck around that? Maybe not too problematic if you just get a couple 1-cost Titans and run away with the game from that. So it's intriguing, right? It's definitely got some downsides. It's got some challenges, but I don't know that it takes a ton to give you some lines, which make this card kind of neat. So next up here, we have Insmollen, the opposite of Embiggen, and it's a 3 mana nature spell. Will reduce the cost and attack of minions in your deck by 1. So spend 3 now, but potentially save tons of mana along the way, because each minion you get after this is going to be reduced by 1. Only takes 3 minions to make this worth it. Frankly, it may only take 1 minion to make it worth it, because cheating something big into play faster can really pay off, right? Getting a big, awesome wing condition card down a turn sooner or something can be worth way more than just 3 mana or 2 net mana in that particular instance. So kind of a different sort of ramp, right? Instead of ramping to the actual mana, you're ramping through cost discounts instead. So it's a wild growth that has, I would argue, potentially even more crazy upside. And often you're not going to care about the attack of your minions getting reduced, because who cares, right? You just want to play big, scary stuff sooner. I mean, we've already seen Aulonius could be nuts on this, right? Discounting your Aulonius to 6. That gives you more mana to blow people up with spell damage upside, so that's cool, but certainly not the only combination of cards that could absolutely benefit here. So in small, it to me just looks good. Like, I think decks will happily spend 3 on this. There's so many like backloaded Druid decks that have big things they're trying to get done. Spending 3 early has never been a problem for Druid to do that. It does take, you know, draws to pay this off, and you have to have enough minions, so it's not maybe like every deck makes sense for this if they're too spell heavy or whatever, but as long as you have that sufficient number of minions and you have a sufficient amount of card draw to pay this off within a few turns, it just makes sense to me. It just lines up too well. So next up, what everybody wanted to see, Jade Druid is back in standard format for real. This is the Jade Display, a 1-mana 1/1 with Death Rattle. Your Jade displays have +1/+1 this game. Shuffle 2 of them into your deck. Which, oh boy, it's infinitely scaling Jades again here. So yeah, let's talk about this, right? Like, this is not as scary as old school Jade Druid, because this is a much different way to get things going. That deck had a lot of different Jade cards with various other upsides, by the way, like ramp and taunts and various other effects that benefited you, right? And you could basically play out a game pretty normally on curve, still doing the things you want to do, and having enough to start the Jade engine, because, you know, you got 6+ cards or whatever it was, I don't remember, you know, but basically you've got a lot of different ways to get things moving, that it was a coherent game plan that kind of made sense, and you could just get it rolling. With Jade Display, you've only got the 2 Jade displays to get things moving. So you have to find these cards specifically, and then you have to actually find the next iterations of these cards as well that you've shuffled into your deck. So it actually takes a couple deaths or otherwise Death Rattle activations of the Jade displays in order to get your deck to the same sort of Jade consistency that you would start at with Jade Druid of old. So you're kind of starting from this Jade deficit, if you will, with this kind of version of the card, as opposed to the full committed package that you had in the past, which is going to slow down the rate of scaling. It's also sometimes just going to make it hard to like find times to use these or get enough down all at once, because at some point, of course, your deck is just going to be all Jade displays, and, you know, throwing in a 1-mana 10/10 or whatever on top of your play is solid, obviously. Like, that's nuts. Like, we love 1-mana 10/10s, but how soon is that going to happen? Is it going to happen too late? How consistently you're going to get that nice 1-mana bonus? You might miss a turn or two, and it's not going to have that kind of overwhelming nature. The Jade Idol offers you a little bit more flexibility for when you wanted to commit into that Jade package, or you wanted to draw through multiple Jades all at once. Whereas with this, you're definitely stuck kind of just playing the cards as they're dealt, which I think is going to feel far harder to do. So is there going to be some deck that can cheese enough extra Death Rattle activations or enough card draw, or can use this as kind of a late game package that it's not really a Jade deck, but it has this infinite value piece where they're just like, I'm going to play a normal Druid game plan, just draw through a bunch, burn what I can, you know, be super efficient. And then, you know, if I'm playing a warrior or a priest or something where that wasn't enough to kill them, that wasn't enough value, I'm just using the Jade display as a backup plan here in Fatigue so that I can go infinite as needed and burn down a value deck long as opposed to short. That's a possibility for this, you know, that kind of release valve for Fatigue or super value matchups. I think that's a possibility. I don't think the kind of I'm going to make as many Jade displays and as many death rattles as possible as quickly as possible. I don't think that's going to work necessarily. So in other words, I do see pretty limited utility for this card. So scary at first glance, but maybe not actually all that scary when you look closely. And then our final card here is the Wind Up Sapling, a new 2-mana 2/1. It's got tradable and Battlecry, refresh 1 mana crystal, trade that to upgrade it. So basically, if you trade this, you get to see a new card, which is nice. You also get to bank that mana crystal that you're spending basically into your Wind Up Saplings. I'm spending 1 now, but I'm going to get an extra mana crystal refreshed later off of the Wind Up Sapling, which honestly, even after 1 trade isn't really worth it, because then you're spending 2 to refresh 2, which puts you right back where you were, which means you basically just got a 0 mana 2/1, which is not exciting, which means you have to actually trade this multiple times in order for it to feel worth it, which I think is going to be too punishing on this. Like, mana refresh is scary, and trading isn't bad. Like, we like trading, but it's still something you got to do. You got to weave in that 1 mana time after time, and it's going to take quite a few iterations to make this feel like the refresh on it is really significant. And I don't know if decks are going to value the time that takes, just literal like number of turns it takes, or total mana expenditure as well, because you are just still kind of falling behind a little bit on mana until you get to that payoff, which is going to be rather delayed. So I don't know, man. Tradable's good. Like, there's something kind of intriguing here, but I have a hunch it's just going to take too much work for most decks for this one to really feel worth it. Although I suspect people might disagree with me there. All right, so now let's do some quick reviews. Aulonius is a 4-star card. Magical Dollhouse is a 4-star card. Sparkling Phial is a 4-star card. Bottomless Toy Chest is a 4-star card. Woodland Wonders is a 3-star card. Sky Mother Aviana is a 3-star card. Insmolin is a 4-star card. Jade Display is a 3-star card. Wind Up Sapling is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. What do you think of these Druid cards? Is this crazy? Is it scary? Is this going to ruin the game? I want to hear all those thoughts and more in the comments below. But until then, thanks so much for watching. And until next time, game on.